Hi everyone, welcome to a last minute podcast episode. I am recording this on Tuesday, March 3rd at 11:16 a.m. So, this podcast episode wasn't planned. I was actually kind of resisting doing this podcast episode, had to sleep on it for a couple days, but it's still nagging me. So that's usually my signal that I just need to do it. So again, this is not going to be like a super organized, it's going to be more of a riff episode. As if my listeners are literally hanging out with me at home and I am just talking about the chart. So, and that's ultimately what I want it to feel like, is just a conversation that I would have, personally with someone in my own home. I want it to feel like a riff. There's, it's not planned, it's not polished, it's not edited. I'm not editing this. I'm going for it. So, yeah. There is a lot of confusion around this Iran, US, Israel situation. A lot of people currently kind of saying different things. So the confusion, the anxiety, the where are we going, what are we doing, the who, what, where, when, why, collectively, I think is just very frustrating. And, I think when I looked at the astrology this morning, I was expecting to have a hard time finding correlations or cycles with it. And surprisingly, I was wrong. There was just like laughable, from a professional astrology perspective, just very in your face. I was shocked. I was truly, truly shocked to find what I found literally an hour ago. So that was the additional kind of cue to give me the green light, I think, to get on here and speak about it. Now, of course, this is not conclusive. Like, I have to say that. And this is not going to be the fear-mongering, podcast episode. I really want to present this in the best way possible as like I said, like a conversation that we're having personally. But if you were one of my friends, if you were one of my loved ones, what I would tell you, that is the perspective that I'm coming from. So again, is this to like live your life based off of these main points that I'm saying in the chart? No, it's just a perspective to help keep your head on a swivel. This is a good time to, depending on your natal chart, I think this Mercury retrograde in Pisces is a good time to pull back. Don't get lost in the confusion, the resistance, the frustration. This is the time to kind of pull back, rest, recharge. But particularly this week, even into next week, could be a more charged situation, particularly within the United States. So again, this is like, I'll get into the showing you the visuals of the chart, but I am using the United States birth chart. Okay? I'm not using other countries' birth charts. So I want to make that very clear. This is from the United States perspective. I might poke around Netanyahu's chart, to add overlap or complexity. But again, I want to make that clear. So, because there's talks of terrorist attacks and yada, yada, yada. So I'm going to stop talking. I also want to apologize. My natal Mercury is in Virgo. It's exalted. And Mercury is in detriment, technically in fall and retrograde right now. So I am trying so hard to communicate properly. It's really, as soon as Mercury went retrograde in Pisces, I was like I immediately wanted to communicate telepathically and not physically. So bear with me. I'm also probably going to take the next couple weeks in March off. I am absolutely preparing the April monthly horoscopes, but there is so much happening in April that I cannot deny that I had to break it down into 4 parts. So I'm actually going to do the April monthly horoscope weekly. So I am going to be working on that. So it's like, I'm still going to be here. This is a time for me to, I think, pull back a little bit, review, revise, reevaluate with how these transits are sort of interacting with my natal chart. So if you don't see or hear from me in the next couple of weeks, don't be alarmed. But absolutely, if like another major issue comes up and I have that visceral gut reaction that I need to get on, then I'll do another last minute episode. Anyways, I'm going to stop talking and I'm going to start getting into this issue from an astrological perspective. Okay, so this inner wheel is the United States birth chart. It is not going to change. This outer wheel is the transits on June 22nd, 2025. Now, why am I going back to June 22nd, 2025? June 2025 was when President Trump launched Operation Midnight Hammer, which was a targeted military strike on Iranian nuclear facilities. And lo and behold, here we are again. So the strikes occurred on June 22nd, 2025. So, and I think it was more than one site. I think it was like 2 or 3. Either way, what I want to point out on this day, so again, inner wheel United States, the transit on June 22nd, 2025. What I want to point out on this particular day is that the North Node here, the transiting North Node, was at 22 degrees. I want you to remember that. North Node at 22 degrees. Another point I want you to remember is transiting Mercury. Transiting Mercury was at 24 degrees, pretty much exactly conjunct the United States natal Mercury at 24 degrees. Okay? So these 2 points, and I'll make sure you remember when I pull up why. The transiting South Node was also going over the United States natal Neptune, which I think might come into gear more so in 2027. But again, I want to focus on right now, or June 2025. Mercury, 24 degrees. North Node, 22 degrees. So, when we go to the day we attacked Iran in 2026, that was February 28th, 2026, transiting Mercury at 22 degrees. Where the North Node was back in June of 2025 when we had strikes in Iran. Okay? So currently, Mercury stationed retrograde at the degree that the North Node was at back in June 2025, when we apparently took out their nuclear facilities or whatever. So, what I want to get to this week is when Mars, if you're watching, Mars has recently entered Pisces. But when Mars gets to 4 degrees of Pisces, which is a critical degree, okay? So 4 degrees of any mutable sign, Pisces, Gemini, Virgo, Sagittarius, is a critical degree. It adds a little extra zhuzh to that planet. It makes it sort of like it's more of a sensitive point. Why I am pointing out Mars at 4 degrees at a sensitive degree in the United States 4th house of homeland. Again, this is the 4th house. In our natal charts, it's home, family, property, real estate. You know, in a country's chart, it's literally the homeland. Also property and real estate, but we're not focused on buying homes with this current issue right now. So, Mars at a sensitive degree in the United States 4th house of the homeland. But Mars also rules the United States IC, which is that specific angle to the homeland, our land. So, this Mars will be at the midpoint of Pluto and Saturn, which is technically also conjunct the United States IC, that specific angle to the homeland. So, Mars at the midpoint merging Pluto and Saturn energy is brutal. That's tough. My concern with it being at the midpoint at a critical degree adds a little extra layer of concern for me, particularly because Mars rules the United States 12th house of behind the scenes, also hidden enemies. So this could be a point, like the deeper we get into this week, maybe even a little bit into next week, this could amplify more of the terrorist attack stuff, amplify more of that news. I'm hoping it's just talk of it. But my concern is that, we've had Mars at the midpoint of Pluto and Saturn, but I looked back, we haven't had a Mars in Pisces at a critical degree in the mutable sign at the midpoint of Pluto and Saturn. This takes on a different tone. So with the transiting moon also in Scorpio trine that natal Mars on March 7th, again, I'm Eastern Standard Time Zone. Like I said, this week into next week, it is a little concerning. I'm hoping this isn't anything negative that happens here in the US, obviously. But it's concerning. So again, this is where I always say, we have to live our lives. We have to keep going to work and taking care of our family and doing our things. But, keep your eyes and your ears open. especially this week into next week. And again, I could be wrong. I hope I'm wrong. But again, if I see it, like if you were one of my loved ones or my friend in my home and I saw this in our country, especially after a Mercury Cassimi, where Mercury rules the seventh house would be like Iran, it would be Israel, it would be like the other people involved. In the fourth house of the homeland, it's just, it's a little concerning. Am I gonna freak out about it? Am I gonna have an anxiety attack? No. This is to just keep your eyes and your ears open. And again, I don't pay attention too much to the news because I try to remain as objective as possible with astrology, but it wouldn't surprise me if like this was the amplification of like the potential threats of terrorist attack, the potential of, it happening or, but I also want to point out that there's a lot of attacks in history that were prevented. So this doesn't mean like it's actually gonna happen. But again, if I see it, I say it. I'm hoping that even though Mars is at a critical degree, it's still in Pisces. So it kind of mitigates some of Mars like precision and accuracy in terms of like things, the plan of action kind of happening. So again, we'll see sort of like how that actually specifically plays out. But like, am I going to go to like a major event or be in like a major crowd this week into next week? No, I'm not. I don't really like the midpoint with that. I don't like how the midpoint's happening with the Mars at a critical degree and the moon in Scorpio in that 12th house ruled by that Mars in a trine configuration to that. So take it or leave it. So yeah, let's see. Shortly after that, on March 10th, March 11th, let me get this to the hour. Yeah, March 10th or 11th, depending on where you are. This is when March 11th at like 1:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time in the US. So yeah, depending on where you are. This is when Jupiter stations direct. Why is that important? Jupiter rules the United States ascendant, which is us, our presence, our identity. So March 10th, March 11th, the United States ruling planet stations direct in his place of exaltation. Technically trine that natal Mercury retrograde in that Pisces 4th house, homeland. But what I particularly find interesting about the United States ruling planet stationing direct, March 10th, March 11th, that Mars in Pisces is getting very close to a conjunction with the North Node. Why this is important is because if you notice, if you're watching, the United States natal Uranus is at 8 degrees of Gemini in the 7th house of the other. So again, the 7th house would be Israel, it would be Iran, it would be these other people involved. Okay? That transiting Mars applying to the transiting North Node in this 4th house of homeland will be square, tension, stress, action to the United States natal Uranus, sudden events, change, etc., in that seventh house of the other. An additional reason why this is important is because the transiting North Node is putting the United States natal Uranus in that seventh house of the other at what's called a north bending. This is a point of increase. So increasing partnership, increasing the other going on at this time, with Mars now getting closer and closer in terms of getting involved. So again, this could sort of, again, it's not conclusive, but this could be a situation where, our ruling planet stations direct, sort of giving us the green light to go in its place of exaltation. Also in the United States 8th house, which is interesting because this is other people's resources. So, the money, the finances, the resources pushing forward, moving away from a square to the United States natal Saturn. This could be sort of increasing resources, taking off the brakes since it's moving away from the natal Saturn. Because Saturn, squares can sometimes cause Jupiter to kind of pump the brakes a little bit in this case, in terms of sort of long-term goals and resources, but that's now separating. And Mars is inching closer to the North Node at that point of increase. The North Node likes to amplify things. So with the square to Uranus, Mars-Uranus can definitely amplify issues, conflict. Especially, if you've listened to my Mars-Uranus cycle podcast episode that I recently posted, you can quickly see there's really major conflicting events that Mars-Uranus can really bring up. And so this is technically at the closing square with the United States natal Uranus. So yeah, this to me doesn't look like it necessarily slows down. I'm not sure specifically, obviously, what it's going to look like. But the next point I want to get to is, what is it? It's March 18th. So March 18th, then we have Mercury will still be retrograde. If you're watching, red means retrograde. Then we have Mercury retrograde pretty much exactly conjunct that North Node. So how I just mentioned, Mars was applying to the North Node, square the United States natal Uranus in that seventh house of the other. Now Mercury retrograde comes back to that point as well, where Uranus is still at that north bending at that point of increase in the other, but Mercury retrograde is now involved in the situation. Mercury rules the United States 10th house of visibility, public image, public recognition. It also rules that 7th house of the other. So with Mercury retrograde about to station direct, ruling this natal Uranus here, square the nodes, is fascinating to me. This doesn't seem like things are slowing down. And even if they appear to be slowing down, this might be a situation where what it appears to be is not. And it's about to become clear, if that makes sense. So again, Mercury ruling Iran, Israel, anyone else at this point that's gotten involved. Why I think this is important is because this could be the point where we start to see the sprinkles or even actually see other people's involvement, right? Mercury is about to station direct conjunct the North Node, that point of increase. The North Node can amplify things. Mercury, in this case, rules the United States 7th house of partnership. So this could be amplifying partnership, amplifying alliances. after that retrograde period, with Mars applying to a trine to that natal Jupiter, which rules the United States' first house of self, as well as the fourth house. So this could be a very interesting time where, maybe we see increasing partnerships. Maybe we see an increasing sense of public image, or gearing up for more visibility around the situation when Mercury stations direct. And then we are also gearing up on this day, or maybe, yeah. So later in the day, later in the day on March 18th, again, Eastern Standard Time. You can see it here if you're watching in the upper right corner. Later that day, before Mercury stations direct conjunct that North node, square Uranus, okay, at that North, bending that point of increase in the 7th house of the other, there's a new moon at 28 degrees in the United States 4th house of homeland. However, this new moon will technically be at the midpoint of the United States natal Pluto and the transiting Uranus. So if these guys weren't in the picture, if Pluto and Uranus weren't sort of involved in this midpoint picture of the new moon, very different story. But I think, Pluto, Uranus, like, again, I don't think this is like a new beginning. I think this could be sort of where things evolve into something else, especially with Mercury gearing up to station direct. So things could be evolving into something else. News and information could be shifting in terms of what we're hearing, what's being communicated. And then when we get to April, I want to get to April 9th or 10th. Okay, yeah. Again, I just listed like the days I want to cover. But once we get to April 9th, April 10th, depending on where you are, this is when, again, Mercury returns to 22 degrees. Remember what I said in the beginning, the 22 degree mark. So June 2025, the North Node was at 22 degrees. Then February 28th, 2026, Mercury stationed retrograde at 22 degrees, connecting us right back to Iran. Now, April 9th, Mercury returns to that 22 degree mark. So from a cyclical perspective, Mercury goes over a point, goes retrograde, and then does its last pass over that point, moving out of what we call shadow. So, theoretically concluding that story. So just looking at Mercury here at 22 degrees, about to leave shadow on April 9th, one could assume, this is around the 4 to 5 week mark that Trump said, maybe Mercury's leaving shadow, we can conclude this, etc., etc. Not quite. Because when you look at what's going on in the background, you have Mars at 29 degrees, ready to push into its place of rulership. So this is a shift. This is when things, I think, change, because Mars is about to gain a significant amount of essential dignity. So basically, Mars, the planet of action, war, conflict. Mars is literally about to gain a lot more resources, so to speak. So then, I'm on April 10th, Eastern Standard Time. Mars is at that 0 degrees of Aries, which is another critical degree, is 0 degrees of a cardinal sign. So originally when I was looking at the Mercury cycle, I was like, oh, we did strikes on Iran February 28th, 2026. Mercury was just stationed retrograde. When it stations direct and then goes back over that 22 degree mark and moves forward, we'll be out of shadow. Hopefully that's a concluder to it. I think with Mercury moving out of shadow and Mars then entering its place of rulership, trine, again, dissolving obstacles. So Mars is not only in rulership, gaining a good amount of essential dignity, but it is also going to be trine the United States natal North Node in its 9th house of international affairs. So I think this could be sort of the, like trine. Trines can be good, but they can also be bad. With Mars also applying to a conjunction with Neptune, April 10th, over the course of the next couple of days, this is significant because if you're watching, you will see that the United States natal Mars is almost exactly square its natal Uranus. So in the United States birth chart, it has a Mars-Neptune square. So when there are major Mars-Neptune conjunctions, squares, oppositions, it can signal or sort of, because the United States chart theoretically has a Mars-Neptune signature in it, Mars-Neptune conjunctions, oppositions, squares could be playing into that. So that's another layer to this that I think could be going on. The next day I want to jump to is around April 20th. So why did I put that? Literally, this is such a riff. I don't even have notes. I just listed dates to pull up and see what my eyes pull out. Actually, I want to go back because something else just jumped out at me. The other thing I want to point out, going back to April 10th, April 11th, April 9th, 10th, or 11th. Again, there's orbs around these planets, whether it's applying, separating. Mars being at 0 degrees of a cardinal sign, sensitive point. Again, reiterating my point, trine the North Node in the United States natal 9th house of international affairs. Also want to point out that the transiting Sun will be conjunct the United States natal Chiron. That Sun rules that Leo 9th house of international affairs. That's also something that's jumping out at me. Now I want to jump to April 20th. Why did I put April 20th? Oh, I know why. April 19th, April 20th. So around April 19th, we're going to have Mercury, Saturn, and Mars sitting at the 7 degree mark in Aries. So why I think this is important? It's 1 degree away of a trine to the United States natal North Node in that Leo 9th house of international affairs. It is also, potentially dissolving obstacles to, again, North Node in the international affair 9th house. dissolving obstacles to those areas where Pluto is getting a little close to that south node. And Mercury, Saturn, and Mars all sitting around this 7-degree mark will technically be sextile the United States natal Uranus at 8 degrees in that 7th house of the other. So again, this could potentially be more unfolding, especially because this conjunction's happening in Aries, where Neptune, Mercury, Saturn, they're all reporting to Mars in rulership. This is the house of Mars. And it will be trine the North Node in that 9th house of international affairs. And additionally, Uranus will be at the anaretic degree at 29 degrees of Taurus, and the sun will also be at 29 degrees. So around this like April 18th, 19th, 20th, this could be another potential point of intensity. That anaretic degree it's a sense of urgency, and the trine dissolving obstacles to this North Node in the 9th house of international affairs. There's a lot going on here that doesn't look like it's slowing down, is what I think I'm getting at. Like, this really doesn't look like this is something that's slowing down. It actually looks like the dissolution of obstacles. It looks like there are things moving and shaking and happening with the sextiles and the trines. And like I said, like, sextiles and trines aren't always a good thing. It's for better or worse. And I don't know. I want to stay on topic here. I don't want to get too in the weeds. I want to jump to July of 2026 when, oh God. Look, I am truly hoping. Now, another thing I want to point out, okay? When you're looking at mundane astrology, when you're looking at different types of astrology that includes like events, wars, collective energy, how that presents itself in our individual charts is very different. So I think this is something that is not discussed and I think is very, very important. For example, the charts during COVID, okay, that is something I want to talk about for 2 seconds here, because that impacted us worldwide. Not one person in the world wasn't in that, affected by that. That was global, okay? So that's why I'm using it as an example. That devastated us globally, okay? However, there were people thriving during that time. And I'm not talking just like Amazon and like, these big stores that kind of took over because they had the platforms in order to manage this situation better than like mom and pop shops. I'm talking about like you and me listening to this. I was working with people one-on-one during that time. And there were some people who, despite what was going on, had good things happening in their lives. There were people who were able to work from home and do like house renovations. There were people, there was a lot of pregnancies. A lot of people were getting pregnant and starting their families or expanding their family. There was a lot of really beautiful things happening to people on an individual level. So again, I want to reiterate, like, this is not fear mongering. This is not like these transits and what I'm going over here does not mean this is your individual lives. Your individual charts could have amazing things happening around this time. So just want to make that clear, okay? When we get to early July, we have a Mars-Uranus conjunction at 3 degrees of Gemini in the United States' 7th house of partnership. So again, the others. And again, whoever the hell is involved at this point, I don't know. But again, this is something I might have to reevaluate depending on what countries maybe get involved in this. So the Mars-Uranus conjunction at 3 degrees of Gemini in the 7th house of the other. This is initiating a new cycle collectively that we are going to see play out over the next 2.5 years. So, the other thing I want to point out, remember in the very beginning of this, I said June 2025. Transiting Mercury was conjunct the United States natal Mercury when we first apparently went in and took care of Iran's nuclear sites or whatnot. But then again, in February of 2026, we're going in for war. When we get to early July, right around July 4th, transiting Mercury stations retrograde, conjunct the United States natal Mercury. That's significant. Again, I have to show you, if you're watching on Spotify or YouTube, I have to show you this, how crazy this is. Going back to June 2025. So June 22nd, when we first had strikes on Iran's nuclear facilities, transiting Mercury, conjunct United States natal Mercury. You can see it here, 24 degrees, right on top of each other. Uranus at 29 degrees. Remember last summer when we had the taste of Uranus in Gemini and then it backed up into Taurus again? Uranus was at 29 degrees when we first had those strikes to Iranian nuclear facilities back June 22nd, 2025. Now when I go back to July, I would even say late June, before Mercury stations retrograde, it will be conjunct Jupiter at the anaretic degree in Cancer. I think there's a lot of anaretic degrees kind of intensifying things as we kind of move into the summer in the United States. Anyways, once we get to about July 1st, July 2nd, again, Mars-Uranus conjunction in Gemini, 7th house of the other, Mercury stations retrograde, right on top of that natal Mercury. Like, what the hell is that? Again, I showed you if you're watching. Like, what is this? The Mercury retrogrades in water signs this year are fascinating when we're starting to see sort of those contextual clues right now as to what this could really mean for us going deeper into the year. My concern with the Mercury retrograde signatures over the natal Mercury, again, These Mercuries rule the United States 7th house of partnership, where there is a new cycle with Mars and Uranus starting in that area of partnership. What the hell is that? Like, what is starting here that is bringing us back to this Mercury signature that tends to be tied to this Iran situation, where Jupiter has just entered the Leo 9th house of international affairs, applying to the US's natal North Node at that point of increase in that 9th house of international affairs. And then the other thing I want to point out about this time, transiting Saturn at 14 degrees of Aries will be in an opposition to the United States natal Saturn at 14 degrees in Libra. The opposition, the Saturn-Saturn opposition, is hard. However, it's not the whole story. This Saturn opposition will be forming a T-square with the United States natal Sun at 13 degrees in that 8th house. That Sun rules this 9th house of international affairs. T-squares, there is an enormous amount of pressure on the United States natal Sun. So there could be an enormous pressure building and expanding with Jupiter involving this international matter, where there is a new cycle playing out with Mars and Uranus conjunction, which notoriously brings up conflict. The last Mars-Uranus conjunction was the attempted assassination on Trump. So, among many other things. So, do I think this issue is just going to go away? No. And I hope and I pray that I am wrong. I really, really do. This Saturn is going to go retrograde and go back over the 14 degree mark to form that opposition and form that T-square with the Sun. Again, the transiting Saturn at 14 degrees of Aries in opposition to the United States natal Saturn at 14 degrees will be forming a trine to the United States natal ascendant. Again, us, our body, our identity. And it will form a sextile to the United States natal descendant in that 7th house of partnership. So this could signal opportunities to partnerships that could be initiating regarding some sort of conflict. And the sextile and trine with the Saturn-Saturn opposition to the United States natal ascendant, again, us, literally us, could signal opportunities, the dissolution of obstacles to us, our presence, what's going on with us. So there's definitely some very interesting configurations and situations going on. So, did I miss anything? I just want to make sure. Because again, I'm going on a riff here. So the next date I have is early 2027, which really isn't a date at all. So again, like I mentioned, if you're watching, you can see Saturn's going to retrograde. So whatever happens during the summer, with the Saturn cycles, that's another indicator. Whatever happens around that Saturn opposition in the summer, it's not necessarily over. Then we get to, the fall is going to be interesting because that's midterms. I think for Netanyahu too. But anyways, early 2027 is the Mars retrograde, also Jupiter retrograde, with the South Node business in the United States 9th house of international affairs. Why I think this is an important time is when I looked at the midpoints of this time frame. So, when you look at the United States natal Pluto at 27 degrees of Capricorn and the United States natal Mars at 21 degrees of Gemini, the midpoints of the United States natal Pluto and Mars sits around about 9 degrees of Libra or Aries. There's a lot more complexities that go into midpoints, whether it's like or whatever. I don't want to get into that. I don't want to like glaze your eyes over at this point. But generally, this is when we're not only going to have a Mars retrograde with Jupiter, where this Mars retrograde is going to back up into the United States Leo 9th house of international affairs to rejoin Jupiter in the South Node. But this is also, early 2027, maybe even late 2026. But again, with midpoints, I really like to use like a 1 degree orb. I like these orbs to be tight. And with Saturn around this time in early 2027, at that 9 degree mark of Aries is a little concerning. It's not conclusive, but Saturn at 9 degrees of Aries will be at the midpoint of the United States natal Pluto and Uranus. I'm sorry. Mars, Uranus. No. Hold on. No, Pluto, Mars. So early 2027, Saturn at 9 degrees, I believe, will be at the midpoint of Pluto and Mars. It's kind of hard to see visually, but Saturn at the midpoint of Pluto and Mars is not the best midpoint. It's not a party. And that Saturn also returning to the degree of the sextile to Uranus in the 7th of the other, gearing up for a square too, applying to a square to the United States natal Sun, which rules the 9th house of international affairs, etc. We're going to have Pluto early 2027, roughly around the March period, heading towards the United States natal South Node, which I'm not particularly fond of. When the outer planets travel over the United States natal South Node, it's generally not a good time. So I'm not going to go over those events because, again, I'm not here for fear mongering. And this time it's going to be different. There's planets in the doing different things in the background. However, again, this is to reiterate, do I think this is going to just magically go away? No. And if I had, I kick myself because the summer of 2025, I was recovering from so much in my life that I knew the events were happening with Iran, but I wasn't tracking them because there was just too much going on in my personal life. But looking back, I'm like, man, had I tracked that and I saw what I saw in early 2026, I would have said, this ain't over. We're going back in. And so when I'm looking forward now, kicking myself, in the past, I don't I think this is going to evolve into other things. I think this might drag other people into it. And with Pluto conjunct the South Node, like I mentioned, when the outer planets, so Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, tend to go over the South Node point in the United States at 6 degrees of Aquarius, tends to bring up really notable events that aren't a good time. So this South Node in the United States natal chart at 6 degrees of Aquarius is technically at the midpoint of that Mars-Neptune square here. Again, if you're watching and you're like this is just a lot of like geometry. It's just how my eyes work, what I look for. You don't need to get a calculator out. I can kind of see it, or like literally quickly calculate it. So this also means that when Pluto is conjunct the United States South Node, it will technically be at the midpoint of the United States natal Neptune and Mars. So, that's another point in time in early 2027 that I'm looking at. And lo and behold, March 2027, when Pluto is going over the United States natal South Node, transiting Saturn, goes back over that 14-degree mark, opposing the United States natal Saturn at 14 degrees, creating that T-square with the natal Sun ruling that 9th house of international affairs, where we have this Jupiter retrograde, South Node, Mars retrograde business happening in that United States 9th house of international affairs. So yeah, that's, again, I don't have this like perfectly polished ending. I just wanted to get on here, do a riff, go over some dates to show you the significance of these degrees, how these cycles are really playing out, and how, as I'm recording this, on March 3rd, I'm not, it might be a little bit to gain clarity on the situation. I don't think we have the full scope. I don't think we have the full story. I don't even think we have the full story as to why this is happening, because astrologically, this actually started back in June of 2025. And I would argue that astrologically, this might have started decades ago. So some of you who've been alive much longer than me might have more information as to what was going on in the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, because there is, definitely cycles tied to that. So when you start looking at the astrology, you start to see a larger truth play out with the language of astrology. And so, like I said, I would individually, how this is impacting us is very different from the collective. And so I think for a lot of us, depending on our natal chart, March is a good time to allow a different way of seeing things. Allow yourselves to see different perspectives. Allow yourselves with this full moon eclipse in Virgo to maybe release things that are no longer serving you. Release things that are affecting you. I think that 2026, a lot of us collectively are going to start seeing larger universal truths. And I think more information, more truth, whether it's war, whether it's Epstein, whether it's the midterm elections, all of these things. I think it's the perfect time to start taking a step back, looking at things more objectively, comparing, contrasting, looking at things from, critical thinking perspective, and using the astrology, using the charts to see, does that track? Does that align? What can we prepare for? I think from United States perspective, this week, so again, I'm recording this March 3rd. This week, going into next week, is probably a better time to become, again, and not everyone has the luxury of doing this, but become a little bit more insular, if that makes sense. So just, focusing on your immediate friends, your immediate family, maybe spending more time resting, recharging, sleep if you can, just kind of turning inward a little bit, and seeing what plays out, especially this week into next week, just because, I think whether it's and again, that Mars at the midpoint of Saturn and Pluto, with Mars being in the United States, 4th house of home and family, Mars or homeland, and Mars ruling that 12th house of behind the scenes, hidden enemies. It's sort of like what hidden enemies are on our homeland, with Mars and Pluto kind of being, Pluto, the planet of death and transformation, and Saturn being sort of isolation and restriction. Does that mean an actual terrorist attack is going to happen? Maybe. I guess we're always under threat to varying degrees, but this could also indicate that this could be a larger news story that they play over and over and over to create that anxiety and that fear. So again, using the astrology to say, okay, in the United States, Mars at the midpoint of Pluto and Saturn, as I mentioned earlier in this episode, Mars ruling hidden enemies, Mars being in the 4th house of the homeland, Mars at the midpoint of Saturn and Pluto, notoriously being, like attacks, conflict, brutality, violence, Mars being at that critical degree. It's either going to be sort of those news stories that play over and over again to say, like, we could be attacked, we could be attacked, we could be attacked, we could be attacked, to create that anxiety, or it could actually be something. Either way, my point is to look at the chart as a whole organism and say, you know what, either way, I think this is just a time to observe, turn inward, rest, recharge, get clear on where you as an individual want to go in 2026. Like I mentioned, even during COVID, people started families, expanded their families, did renovations, started new businesses, new careers, new passions. On an individual level, there for a lot of us, there was, new things starting. And on a collective level, it was horrible. We were all going through and seeing horrible things, but there were still opportunities and still good things happening too. So I don't want you to look at this episode or be watching the news right now and say, 2026, it's all doom and gloom. I think to some level, that's what they want you to believe. And, I think my whole thing is like, how can we take our power back and use this time to really get clear on where we want to go as individuals. And, the world doesn't stop. The world keeps going. And, to basically, especially now, keep your eyes and ears open, protect yourselves, keep yourselves safe, and that's even energetically and emotionally as well. That Mars at the midpoint of Pluto and Saturn, for some of you, it might feel like energetic attacks. It might feel like emotional or spiritual attacks, where like the news is too much, the stories are too much. It's sort of increasing your porosity. So this is not just physical, this is also energetic as well. So, again, the Mercury retrograde, the Mars in Pisces, for us, depending on our natal chart, a lot of us, the time to slow down, turn inward, minimize. Try to minimize your schedule, get clear on what's really necessary right now, because things will likely ramp up and take off for a lot of us individually come April. And like I said, April monthly horoscopes, stay tuned for that. I will post part 1 the last week of March so that you have enough time to kind of take notes, prepare. There is so much happening in April. I've never had to break down a monthly horoscope into 4 parts. So again, stay tuned for that. But for the rest of March, this Mercury retrograde, Mars in Pisces is not a familiar energy with my natal chart. So I'm going to kind of take a step back. I'm going to recover. I'm going to recharge because I'm going to launch and really start working on things in April. And I want to be clear and balanced and ready to go for that for all of you. But until then, if anything else comes up and I get that visceral sort of sacral authority to get on and talk about something, whether it's to ground us, to provide perspective, I absolutely will always follow my sacral authority. But if I don't get that, I will see you all the last week of March.